Hello, welcome back to the Scouted Football Podcast. It's me, Joe Donoghue, ready to dig into yet another footballing story from this season, which has captivated audiences, albeit from home. There's a particular under-23 angle and a scouting angle to it as well. If this is your first time listening to the Scouted Football Pod, then welcome. There is a back catalogue of episodes on previous clubs, players, tournaments, regions, and that you can access right now on whichever podcast or streaming app you're listening on. If you're a regular listener, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in again. Glad to know that you aren't sick of these dulcet tones just yet, but please do consider recommending us to a friend, work colleague, family member, anybody who likes their football. I'm sure there's something in our archive that they'll enjoy. But let's get into it. First and foremost, the most important thing to do is to introduce my guest this week, and that is none other than the Athletic's Michael Bailey. Michael is the Norwich City correspondent for the Athletic, and will be travelling up and down the country next season, visiting Premier League grounds once again. As for those of you who aren't aware, Norwich, still under the management of Daniel Farke, were promoted back to the Premier League as champions of the Championship this season. Michael, great to have you on. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, Joe. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to a few weeks break because it feels like I've been working solidly for 2 years. So I'll take it. But yeah, it's been a joy actually, and I don't think everyone who's followed every club can say that over the past 10 months or so. So I feel appreciative of that.
No, definitely. I think sometimes it can sort of feel a little bit of a slog even when you're a fan. So covering a club or up and down the country as you do obviously will be a real task sometimes. But yeah, it's a joy. Sort of is the impression that I get from Norwich a lot of the time. They're a vibrant young football club. Well, not young in the sense that the club is young, rather that they have a very young squad. And it's been very good sort of watching them in pieces this season, because I think that the thing that makes Norwich so entertaining is those individual players, the Emi Buendias, the Max Irons, those types of footballers who Norwich have managed to keep a hold of. But in terms of you personally, you're obviously working at the Athletic. You've covered Norwich for about 15 years or so. You've pretty much seen the ups and downs, the highlights and the lowlights, as high as it can get, as sort of a yo-yo Premier League Championship club.
Yes, I think I've seen Norwich go up every possible way in the Championship, from the Championship. I'm at this point now where I know how good the last season has been, and I know how difficult the next season to come is, because I've seen it unravel, and I've seen it be bad, but obviously with maybe 2 seasons ago keeping a lot of their principles. I've seen the club look completely lost. And I'm seeing them now where there is such a clear strategy and identity to what they're doing. But then, when you follow one club for so long, you kind of know how fragile everything can be as well. So it's been fascinating. Norwich, I find that there's a lot. There's something unique about Norwich in terms of what they are, where they are, what they look like, and maybe what they inspire in people on the outside, whether that's like of a shrug of the shoulders or bits of their history that people have twigged, or maybe some people see them as as almost like also runs that maybe haven't achieved much, or are kind of a non-entity, but that would completely dismiss so much of what Norwich is and how important it is to a county of over a million people. And there's so many Norwich fans who are abroad and who are desperately following the club as well. I think you have to come here to kind of appreciate just how big a deal it is. Maybe as big as clubs that would be seen as big clubs, but they're in sort of areas where there are lots of clubs around, and so it's you have a battle for attention almost, whereas Norwich don't have that. They have the complete attention of a lot of people who know this area, and it really is the only thing going on. So there's a lot of uniqueness to Norwich. I think that inspires a lot of pride in a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. It is kind of one of those. I mean, it's a one club city, and obviously, the big rivalry with Ipswich is, it's Norfolk versus Suffolk, and of course, they're two big counties in the United Kingdom, and of course, yeah, it's gonna pull in fans from all over the county, as you say. in terms of sort of the past season or so, I mean, 2019-20, that was the relegation from the Premier League. But I think the general consensus was that, this was a well-run club. This was a club who had, I mean, looking from a purely financial perspective, lots of saleable assets. The Todd Cantwells, I think I saw a new transfer linked to him every week in the close season following that relegation. But the Timu Puki, Emi Buendia, Max Aarons, Todd Cantwell, the club managed to maintain them, to retain them, sorry. Was immediate bounce back a foregone conclusion, or, from sort of your granular view, your granular approach of it, was it less of a foregone conclusion and more of a, well, we're going to have to get this right if we're going to have to pull off what our intention was when we came down?
Yeah, I think I remember distinctly that I went into the start of this season thinking that I was prepared to give them a degree of leeway with how the previous season had ended, because they were so clear on what they were having to do. But to give them the leeway of just how bad it got at the end of the Premier League season meant that the expectation had to really be on them come the start of this year. I remember saying, someone asked me, "Oh, where do you think Norwich will finish?" I was like, "Well, they should win it." And normally I wouldn't be as bold as that, but it was literally, look at the squad, and they still had Ben Godfrey at that point, but you kind of anticipated that he would probably go. So I think there was sort of for me personally, professionally as well, they needed that pressure on them because of what they'd been allowed the previous year. I think COVID, in a way, the financial implications of that, again, part of the reason why I felt so confident in what they should go on to achieve was because there was so much instability everywhere, and a lot of it, and it's kind of the similar this window as well. You can look at those players and think they're great talents, high value, really important to Norwich, but it's so much about who comes in to buy them. And although there was a lot of speculation, there was never really much concrete interest. I think when you look at Max Aarons and what you're dealing with is an approach from Barcelona to loan him without any obligation to buy him at the end of it, you're like, well, has anyone got any money here? What is anyone doing? And so it flipped maybe more towards the end of that window for me of not whether they were going to go, but what state these players would be in their minds once the window had closed. Because it was literally no point having Todd Cantwell and Emi Buendia, particularly, going into October and November if their heads weren't in it and they're like, I really don't want to be here. Because then you can be any kind of great player, but if you've not got your head in it, you're not going to contribute properly. And then that would have then become a major issue. And I think you've seen from just what they've contributed for the rest of the season, those players got their heads around it themselves, which is a brilliant achievement for those guys. Daniel Farke managed the situation incredibly well, given a lot of people were kind of doubting it when he was saying he'd rather play the kit man in September than these players if their heads weren't right. And he literally was dropping them from his squad, which people felt that bridges were being burned in terms of supporters. They were were really wary of the situation. And so from that point on, once it was clear that they could get their heads together, I wasn't really worried about January because it felt like the momentum would carry them through by that point. But that was probably the biggest difficulty. But they were handed an advantage in the way that it was difficult to see who would buy these guys for the money that Norwich probably still wanted to pay or to receive for them. And the ones who did go kind of envisaged they would lead. I felt like they would be reasonably happy to let Jamal Lewis go. And, it was almost relatively cheap for sort of 15 to 18 million quid. And whether it's the right option for him in Newcastle is a difficult one. I think with Ben Godfrey, I think that was spot on. And, Norwich got their record fee, which was 25 million quid with add-on, including the add-on sort of as a package. But Everton fans would probably now, although Everton were trying to sort of suggest it was less, I think they would just now look at it and go, 25 million quid for him, a bonus. And I think a lot of people here at Norwich were saying, well, that's great value. And in fact, some people were a little bit disappointed at the time that it was maybe not a bit more. So Norwich had to balance that. But in signing Ben Gibson, they probably had a more rounded, complete defender, just with less potential. Ben Godfrey will end up being a better player probably than Ben Gibson, but Norwich's defence improved by recruiting Ben Gibson. Hopefully I've said the right Bens in the right places there. It gets confusing.
No, I know where you're coming from. I mean, the sales of Jamal Lewis and Ben Godfrey in particular, that raises sort of £40 million. And I think what we've seen in the past few years in the Championship with the likes of Leeds and Aston Villa being promoted whilst making quite hefty losses, 40 million essentially allows you to be competitive. It allows you to retain those key players on Premier League wages essentially, or sort of bottom half Premier League wages, and it just gives you that little bit of buoyancy, I think, which has probably been quite important to keeping this squad together, who have clearly had their heads in it all season. I think 15 goals, 16 assists for Emi Buendia this season. I mean, it's an incredible return. Any player who sort of tops 20 goal involvements in a season, you have to say has been exceptional. So for somebody to get to top 30 is just incredible. And he's 24 now, so he's just up to the scouted age range, but we make honourable exceptions at times like this. And he's just such an interesting player. He's an exciting player. I mean, you've spoken to him, Michael. I mean, what is he like as a person to sit down with, to have a chat with?
Yeah, I have. He's I think there's almost two Emi Buendias in a way. I think there's the one on the pitch who is a bit all over the place. I mean, he's been quite calm in the second half of the season, and I think he's really tried to, have that as a perception of him, that he's kind of got over some of the more sporadic arm waves and frustration and almost borderline dissent, really, that he has exuded at times. I do feel that is easier for him when things are going very well. So I will await how that looks next year when Norwich are going to lose games. Oh, clearly. But he has been outstanding and really well disciplined this year. But he's a firecracker. Norwich had to tell him really early on to you can't, if you're going to be substituted, you can't immediately throw your arms up in the air, because like the head coach is being killed then at that point. And I think you could watch him even at this first part of this season, his frustration, and when there's no one in the ground, you could hear him, swearing effectively at anything. And it is anything. It could be a misplace. It could be someone not spotting him. It could be him misplacing a pass or getting cut out. And there'd always be this fog that would go over him, and his teammates would have to bring him back into the room because you could almost lose him. Just incredible intensity that he plays with, but it's a lot of it's in his head, and it doesn't always transpire into intensity of closing down and running. So it's a real difficult managing act, and I part of me wonders if that is a question mark over him. That other people look at him off the pitch and look at him in games on the pitch and just think, I don't know if I can fancy managing him, because you probably have to put a bit into that. But then what you get, obviously, if you nail it, is an exceptional footballer. I mean, there are only a handful of players I've seen at Championship level who just look so far beyond it. Someone like Ruben Neves a couple of years ago. But yeah, I think Emi this year has looked exactly that himself. But then, off the pitch, you get this really sort of softly spoken, genuine guy who will smile. There's sort of a furrowed brow of he's always quite focused, but he's really pleasant, shy, family orientated, quiet. He won't be going out anywhere regularly. He lives in a village outside of Norwich, tucked away. He's got 2 gorgeous children and a lovely partner, and everything's so sort of quiet. And it's such a contrast to someone who wants to win everything. He wants to be at clubs. Norwich is never going to be the height of his ambition. He wants to win everything. It's just a wonderful thing that he's been called up for Argentina, and it could be one of those moments, I think, where sometimes you throw someone into a situation and you just know they're going to fly. And I wonder if we might get that with Emi this summer with Argentina. We'll have to see, but I think he's a remarkable contrast, and I think sometimes maybe the perception of him from people who just know him on the pitch doesn't really do him justice. But likewise, it probably does as well in terms of what you have to deal with him and how you have to manage him. And he's lucky that he's had such a great man manager with him in terms of Daniel Farke.
Yeah, and I think we'll come on to Daniel Farke in a little bit, but I think in terms of man management, having to having to that managing act, that balancing act that you discussed. I think not every manager would be able to do that, and I think a lot of the time, coaches are. I think in the modern day, we sometimes obsess over tactics and systems and all that, but at the end of the day, football it's a personal business. It's a very human business, and if, as what Daniel Farke was saying at the beginning of the season, if you can't get a player of Emi Buendia's caliber to start firing, then that's going to massively negate the efforts of the team. But on the flip side, if you can't get him firing, then the results are there. 31 goal involvements in a title-winning campaign. It's and I think that there should be more focus on that. And I think, I mean, I can't imagine how you must feel, but I'm overjoyed that he's been given that Argentina call up, because it's deserved. I think it's been a long time coming. I think he got not bad rep. I think he got very good rep in the Premier League. But there was that question mark over, he's only scored one goal, and that was towards the end of the campaign. But I mean, he was consistently one of the players in the top division in one of the best divisions in Europe, who's consistently creating chances for a team who, for all intents and purposes, were probably a little bit understaffed for that division. So I think the quality has always been there, and I think Daniel Farke being able to get the best out of him has been it's probably been one of the major subplots to this season, at least from my perspective, from somebody who doesn't watch Norwich every week. But sort of, in terms of contrasts, the next player that I think we should probably discuss is Ollie Skipp, because his story has been one of Norwich City's season. He has been, whenever I've sort of accidentally found myself on Norwich Twitter, I see a lot of Norwich fans sort of, going, Ollie Skipp he's the truth, he's the future, all of this. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to lie, I never saw that at Spurs, but clearly that there are times when players just, they find the niche and they find that role in a team which really helps them thrive. Has that sort of been the case with him at Norwich?
Yeah, he's a really interesting one. I mean, I feel like I've said so many good things about him in recent weeks but that can be taken the wrong way, because I think what you've got there is a young guy who really desperate to play regular football and hadn't done it. So you don't entirely know what you're going to get. He wasn't even Norwich's first choice. Norwich wanted Ethan Ampadu as their holding midfielder, centre-back, and he was dithering. So they're like, look, Ollie wants to come. So I was like, okay, all right, well, let's go with Ollie then. And his character was exceptional, so that kind of made it quite an easy decision. And I think about the first few games, he was, the draw at Preston, he gave away the penalty, and someone just ran off his back for the other goal, and it finished 2-2. And you're like, he's a great player, but there's a few bits he's really got to learn here. And then as the season came on, he just became so reliable in a position where for Norwich, they needed it. That holding midfield role is so important to what Norwich do. It was a massive weak spot in their Premier League season. Alex Tettey is a Norwich legend and so highly thought of, and Norwich just couldn't get anyone close to his level, and that was it. That was a difficulty and an indictment of Norwich as a club in general, because I don't necessarily feel that the recruitment team completely failed, but maybe the people that they got in, Daniel Farke wasn't having, and so that makes it a collective failure between them. And I'm thinking of someone like Ibrahim Amadou at that point, who wasn't helped by the injury situation as centre back either. So I think it was such an ideal situation for Ollie Skipp to throw himself at it. He then thrived at it. I thought he developed as the season went on in the sort of. He was incredibly solid with Kenny McLean in terms of the way the team had been coached to cover off the areas behind the fullbacks and to progress the play. So they looked really solid in sort of the sort of third quarter of the season. By the fourth quarter, you were getting these bursts from deep that he wasn't really doing earlier. He was really driving the team up the pitch, whereas before it was mostly about his vision and mapping the pitch in his head and knowing how to play a reverse pass into space and that vision. So then you had this extra dynamic, and the penalty he won against Huddersfield was a key to that. He got his first goal as well, sort of in that second half of the season. And you just saw him sort of stepping on again. Now he's so young and he's got so much ahead of him, and he's got the right character and attitude that I do think he's got all sorts of levels, and he could could keep surprising us and just get thrown into the Spurs team and then again just thrive. You never quite know until someone does it. But I still don't feel he's quite there to be playing at a Spurs team that wants to finish in the top 6, top 4 of the Premier League with whatever the changes are going to be there. Now, it may be an easy win for whoever the new manager is to come in and just go, oh, we'll just throw Ollie in because, he's got a homegrown player there. The fans are desperate to see him play. But, I don't know if he's ready for that. I feel like he needs more Premier League football to adjust to a different level. He's still quite new. He's at a level where Max Aarons was when he first played in the Premier League and all of those players. And they needed that season of mistakes in the Premier League to kind of kick on, really. So I do hope that at Tottenham, his personal development path and what's best for him isn't sacrificed because Spurs need, a win. An easy win, and whether that comes with it, that obviously comes with a risk. And again, I say it, he might be good enough, and he might just go, look, I've got it, and away he goes. And maybe part of me just wants him to be back at Norwich next year because I fear what Norwich have got to do to kind of find another defensive midfielder to replace him because it will be such a key role next year. So it's a tricky one, but I think he's such a good talent, and I think just watching him progress over these 10 months has been an absolute joy. And I think sometimes things just click. And that was definitely the case with Ollie.
Yeah, I mean, sort of from the sort of the games that I watched of him just before recording this podcast, it was kind of what you said. Early on in the season, it was that mapping out of the pitch. It was, he was the. I hate the term, and I absolutely hate the term, but the quarterback of this Norwich team. He was very much, who the midfielders and the defenders, they knew they could pass into him, and they knew that they would get it back, or they knew that it would go to a teammate. It wasn't as though you were putting it into a danger, and you could give him all types of passes. Hospital passes that he'd just recycle and just make safe essentially. So I feel like Ollie Skip's kind of been Norwich's bomb disposal expert of their championship title winning campaign because there were a lot of there were, as you said, with the defensive midfield hole, there were a lot of pitfalls and he filled it.
Yeah, I think that's a key point, really, I've probably glossed over a bit, is that his reading of danger was just phenomenal. So as good as he is with the ball and everything can do there, it was really the element without it. And Norwich's backline never really looked exposed, which when they do commit so many players forward has been an issue in the past. And I envisage it being an issue again next season. But yeah, and that's, I don't know how easy that is to coach, really. He certainly picked up on it really quickly, and that's what made, he, like you said, he just put out fires all over the pitch, and I think he surprised people at Norwich with how well he did it.
Yeah, certainly. In terms of the other young players at this club, there's, I think Kieran Dowell's 23, and he signed a permanent deal there, and it was one which for us at Scouted, it was I'm quite pleased for him because he had definitely struggled to find a home since winning the Under-20 World Cup with England in 2017, where he was actually a standout player. I think a lot of people, they might hear the name Kieran Dowell and go, well, who's that? Well, he won the World Cup with a lot of these, prestigious England players who've gone on to be big names. But I think, I mean, from the outside looking in, and that's something which I use all the time on this podcast. But from the outside, it seemed as though Norwich was, why was Norwich suddenly a better fit than Derby County? Oh, that's because there seems to be a structure in place. There seems to be a very amiable squad that he's easy to integrate into. Was that the case from day one with him, or and that was sort of represented on the pitch through his performances, or were there a bit of teething problems?
Yeah, I think with Kieran, for any player in Kieran's position, I think they must be really happy if Norwich come in for them as they are at the moment, because it would strike me as just the ideal place to go, especially as your first move out of a big club. Kieran's Premier League debut actually came against Norwich at Goodison Park at the end of the 2015-16 season, I think, when Norwich were relegated, and he was so good that day, and I think everyone at Goodison Park loved him. And now there is a suggestion maybe some at Everton didn't really want to let him go, and Norwich were always delighted that they got him for the value they got him, and they've tried to do this Premier League recruitment in the Championship almost. These players have arrived because they're hoping that they will have developed this season and be able to offer something in the Premier League. And it will always stick with me after the Reading game. Norwich had they sealed the title that day. Yeah, I think they did. And just speaking to Kieran Dowd about, going back to the Premier League, and he was like, his face was like he could not wait. He was ready for it. And I think with Norwich 2 years ago, you had a lot of players who were about to go into the Premier League, and it was a bit like, and almost like not daunted, but just this excitement and unknown and almost naivety in their eyes. I don't like people calling Norwich naive when they played. I think it was more complicated than that, but maybe a naivety in the players' minds. Kieran's not naive. He knows what the Premier League is. He just desperately wants to go at it, and it was like this hunger. So I think I think that bodes really well. I was surprised how well he was pressing in pre-season. I thought, and clearly Daniel Farke wanted him to do that quite hard and aggressively. Then in the first couple of league games, it kind of reverted back to maybe what I'd seen of Kieran when he played against Norwich, and it was a bit more passive, and I was a bit like, I want a bit more here. Then he injured his ankle in the second game, and that was it for 3 months basically. So, and it took them weeks to get that right. So I think what I would say with Kieran is the fact that he played pretty religiously for the past 2 months when he was fit in the number 10 role. I think Daniel wanted to give that time to Kieran to really get a handle of the role. There were games where he just drifted and you wouldn't have even known he was on the pitch. But I think in a way that is the kind of player he is. But I tell you what, when he's on it, he scores goals and he makes goals. And, if I think Norwich would take someone who plays at sort of 7 out of 10 every week in the Premier League, but you might get the odd sort of goal involvement from him. And you always know he's there because he's working hard, but that quality isn't quite there over maybe 2 or 4 games a season. And you're like, okay, I think they maybe take that over someone who's going to really impact a really good handful of games, and you don't notice him in the others. And because Norwich need that, they need people who can win them games and really impact them and score goals. They got basically no goals from the number 10 position last time. We spoke about Emmy's goals and lack of those earlier. So at that level, so I find him a really interesting one next season because again, I'm speaking. I've done 2 Norwich City podcasts, 3 in fact, I think, and they've all been convinced that Norwich need another number 10. And I'm like, no, let's see what Kieran Dell's got. I think there's something there. I think there's a hunger there, and I might be completely wrong. But I tell you what, he's been brought in with that, and I just think it could be something that really brings the best out of him. And I'm sure we all hope that is the case because he's a lovely footballer to watch, and he's got wonderful talent.
Yeah, I think he's got a fantastic appreciation of space, and I think that's where those goals and those assists come from. Because all it takes, he may have been drifting through a game, and it was similar at the World Cup. I mean, that was the last time I watched him regularly, and then a little bit after that. But it was very similar to. It was very Dutch in a way, in the sense that he'll be in the number 10 position and he'll sort of flit about a little bit and maybe do a few little wall passes here and there, but then at that crucial moment when he needs when the defense sort of really they constrict towards the byline, and then Kieran's just there in space. He's on the edge of the area, and he just takes the ball, either lays it off or takes a shot himself. And you think, it takes intelligence to not be sucked in by that. It takes intelligence to be aware of where you need to be on the pitch. And I think he's had a tough ride of it, not only with the number of clubs that he's had to be at, but also the injuries. So to see that Daniel Farke, obviously we talked about that man management, for him to have gone, you know what, I'm going to give these 2 months to you and see what you can do. What can you do to help impact my team here? And yeah, I think we're on the same page in the sense that I would like to see what Kieran Dowd can do at a Premier League club where he's actually given free rein. I feel like whenever he made appearances for Everton, it felt like he was on sort of I've just used reins, but he was on reins like a little toddler or something. He was very much, he was being sort of, you knew he was going to be hooked back in, and he wasn't going to play for another 2 months or whatever. And that's not what a young player needs. They need continuity. And I think, yeah, I think that hopefully he can kick on in the Premier League next season. I mean, it's a fantastic segue, if I may say so myself. But speaking of Dutch, the next player that I wanted to speak about was Todd Cantwell, because of and also in fact the regular minutes, because I think one thing that a lot of people don't know about Todd Cantwell is that he spent some time in the Netherlands with Fortuna Sittard, very similar to how Mason Mount spent time with Vitesse in the Eredivisie, and I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but before he'd had that loan spell, was there an impression that he could go on to be, go on to have the influence that he did end up having in the Premier League for Norwich, and also this season as well? Was there any indication of that beforehand? And also, what's the future looking like for him? Because I think for a lot of people, he may have dipped off their radar, but is now sort of reappearing because he'll be in that, the very insular Premier League sort of self-interest bubble.
What a way of putting it. Yeah, I think with Todd, he was always incredibly highly thought of coming through the academy. So I think Norwich always felt they had a talented footballer. I think it got to the point where he made his debut against Chelsea at Chelsea in the FA Cup third round replay. People might remember that. And Norwich went out on penalties, but Jamal Lewis scored an equaliser. It was live on BBC, and it was Norwich were in a transition and mid-table and all sorts. It was nothing particularly to write home about here. But Todd came on and he sort of breezed through and had a couple of runs. And you're like, oh, Todd's looking all right at this level, which was the first time obviously it was his debut, so the first time he'd really had a taste of it. And I think at that point, there were people in the club thinking, what are we going to do with this guy? Because he's a local lad. He's the Dirham Deco is obviously his nickname. Yeah. Don't know why. He's nothing like Deco. But so that's just 15 minutes basically down the road from Norwich. Proper homeboy, lovely family, really well brought up, but quite a home bird. And I think Norwich are like, we need to get him out. We need to get him out of here just to go and grow up a bit. And I think Todd, there was a bit of him wanting to do that as well, but it was a question of where, and he didn't want to just get kicked off the park at League Two, because that would be that basically. So I think it was quite astute sending him to the second division in Holland, because that really, gave him the room to pick the ball up to play it. You watch some of his clips back now, and you can see the shortfalls in it, but you can also see him just growing in confidence of playing a bit of men's football, but also just the growing up of living away from home and being in dorms and his television not working and things like that. I think Norwich's loans manager Neil Adams got a few phone calls to deal with a few things, and it was a bit like, Todd, you got to deal with it yourself, mate. So I think there was a bit of that as well. I think it was Norwich are quite keen on the holistic approach of their players, and especially in development and their academy, and just trying to make sure they're mentally strong enough to deal with what a first team is like. And I think the way Todd came into that Premier League season was remarkable, because he went to Vitesse. He went to Sittard, and then Norwich had the season where they won the championship in 2018-19, and Todd was sort of in and around it a lot, but didn't really start a lot of games per se, and was quite in and out. And he was really a peripheral figure to them winning the championship. And there were 3 games at the end of the season where Emi Buendia was suspended, surprise, and Todd came in, and he was just basically being compared to Emi, and he was playing on the right, whereas he's now playing on the left of the 3 behind Teemu. And it didn't work, and he was getting a bit of stick, which I think he probably gets a little bit more because he's a home lad, and I guess Norwich fans feel like they own a bit more of him than they do players who get bought. So the fact that he then came in for the Premier League season and looked so good from the moment pre-season started, you're like, hello. And I think that was Todd spoken about it as well. It was a real conscious effort for him to do that, to really get his head around it and go for it. And I think you saw that then at the start of the Premier League season. I thought he was as good as any player looked. And probably the end of that season as well, he was taking a degree of responsibility when, to be honest, a lot of it was unraveling around him. But I think the speculation, that's been difficult for him to deal with. I think he'd say that himself. And I think it was quite a confusing period. I think, and then injury niggles to the point where you can only really look at probably November onwards to see Todd really stamping his authority on a championship team. And I think he's been as good as anyone for the rest of that season. Made the position his own. I think he's been helped by having a natural left back of top quality in Demetrius Giannoulis behind him. I think that's made a big difference, and that will obviously be probably a dynamic in the Premier League. But again, how Norwich recruit that, whether they look for a bit more pace and experience as well in one of those attacking roles, may mix it up for Todd. But Daniel Farke loves him. If Todd's available, he plays him, and he really does trust him. I think Todd will always work hard, and he can make things happen. I think he likes trusting in what Todd can do in terms of his ability, and everything's so natural. I find him a really fluid, natural footballer who you coach the bits of the job that he has to do, but the rest of it is like, I want you to express yourself. And he's so good in tight spaces. A lot of his game works really well in the Premier League. And I think when he was in the Premier League last time, he'd have probably seen that he didn't like the idea that people felt he could do it in the Premier League, but the Championship would be a bit of a stretch, whether like physically he couldn't deal with it or whatever. He didn't really like that. And I think he's definitely put that to bed now. He is a top class Championship player, but there are still elements of his game, getting out of tight situations, being able to work the ball in those, and having sort of an awareness as well of, and I think it's an improving awareness of what to do in the final third. I think does mean that he can continue to have an influence in the Premier League level. It was a bit inconsistent in that first season, but I think the amount he's grown up in this year, that does make it quite exciting. But he is in an interesting situation. He's got 2 years effectively on his deal. Norwich are aware they are probably going to have to sell someone if they want more transfer money to spend this year. And we talk about Emmy, and you also talk about who comes in for these players. It will be interesting. I get the impression Todd is really highly thought of, and probably doesn't come with the same baggage maybe that some people feel Emmy might. So it's always interesting talking to people outside of Norwich as to how they view these players, because sometimes it's a little bit different to how people see it this side of the fence. It will be really fascinating with Todd, but he's in a good position. I think if he doesn't go this window, Norwich probably get to the point where they're like, we either have to extend his contract here or work out what we're going to do. So that might be a slightly complicating factor.
Yeah, I think purely from a footballing perspective, I think a lot of the time all this chatter about European Super League and whatnot, and UEFA and FIFA making decisions, I think a lot of the time we forget that football's something we're supposed to enjoy. It's an entertainment product. And Todd Cantwell is one of those players who does make you fall back in love with football. That Manchester City game at Carrow Road, it'll be coming up 2 years now. That was a fantastic game. And I can't even begin to imagine what that must have felt like for the Durham Deco, a local boy doing that for his team. That must have been absolutely sensational. And I think it is a reflection of just the atmosphere. You say it's always interesting to know what the opinions are this side of the fence. I think a lot of people, you may say that, a lot of the time when people think about Norwich, they do a little bit of a shrug. But, I think a lot of people, they'll say, it's a club which does have a real family atmosphere to it. It seems very welcoming to players. You don't tend to get, you don't tend to get awful press if you're a player there, and perhaps you're not playing very much. It seems to be a very understanding, nurturing environment. And I think that sort of takes me on to the next point, and I'm gonna mash 3 young players together here, and that's Adam Ida, Josh Martin, and Andrew Omobamidele. Norwich have a decent academy. They obviously play in Premier League 2. But I'd have to check the table. Go off the bat, I wouldn't know where they finished in the standings this season. But in particular,
I think they had a promising start.
Yeah, and then sort of tailed off ever so slightly. Well, there are teams like Leeds in there who pretty much practically field half the first team some games. So it's a difficult old league. But those 3, Ida, Martin, and Omobamidele, they're 3 names that, again, from the outside looking in, are the ones which I look at and think, okay, these are the players that have good rep about them in Norwich's academy, and essentially from watching them, you do get that impression as well. So there's the eye test, the stats, the reports, the local media, everything sort of it stacks up essentially. I think a lot of people from the outside may have thought that if Teemu Pukki wasn't retained when Norwich went down, that Adam Ida may have slotted in. Obviously, he hasn't had the minutes that a lot of people may have expected him to in the Championship this season. The other 2, obviously, a little bit younger than he is. Well, I think Josh Martin's the same age, but hasn't had that first team exposure to the same extent. But what is essentially the plan for them? What is the hope for them at Norwich, really?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think they're approaching some really important times, maybe some more than others. So, Adam Adam just had one of those seasons where it just nothing went right, really. I mean, he scored the last goal and the first goal of the season. But in between, he basically got sent off a bit harshly against Wickham, had a nasty foot injury that came while he was away with Ireland, which I don't think Norwich were best pleased about how that was all handled. He had COVID at one point, and then there was another injury as well. I can't remember which injury that was. So just lots of things that just conspired to write off a season where I, at the start of it, felt it was going to be his breakthrough campaign, because there were glimpses in the Premier League, but he clearly is still quite raw. I think what he needs to be sat at home and he needs to make sure when he comes in pre-season that he has got the mentality Todd had 2 years ago. That's exactly where Adam Eden needs to be, because if he has the talent and the physicality. He could be a proper option for Norwich, but he has to have that. He's quite a laid-back character, and he's at a point now where he's not had a great season. It's not been his fault. He now needs to prove that he is hungry to put that right, make up for lost time, all of the cliches, and because I think it is there for him if he does it. Daniel will play him. They want to bring him on, and they do think he's good enough for that level, and which is an incredible vote of confidence in his ability. You think about it, the fact he's been playing for Ireland. I know that's been going pretty badly, but that speaks volumes, and he's still so young. So he's got to prove that. I think that's why this is an important moment for him, because it is there for him, but he's just got to prove that he's hungry and really, really wants it. So that's a challenge for him, I think. Andrew Omobamidele. Wow, I mean, this is a tricky one, because you really don't want to big someone up and just put pressure on them. But I have to say, like, the way he handled the end of the season is just phenomenal as a centre back. I mean, to the point where he looks as comfortable as Ben Godfrey ever did playing in that role. I have to be honest. His use of the ball, he grew into it. I think it's just immaturity things in a way of, I remember Max Aarons shouting at him at Preston going, well, I won't say exactly what he said, but it was effectively, you need to talk. And I could hear him from the stands, and they weren't the only words he used. But it's that sort of stuff that I think he's got to learn. But defensively, he was so calm and measured at a really important time for Norwich. Admittedly, in a good team, but really impressive for his first senior minutes at a pretty young age. So you kind of feel like he could be anything he wants to be, but by the same token, I can't sit here and big him up and think he's going to go straight into the Premier League, because that is just we've all been scarred by what that level is like for any sort of player. So it'll be interesting whether he hangs around Norwich for the first half of the season as a fourth choice centre back, because I do think Norwich will recruit one this window, or whether he goes out on loan, whether that happens in January. Because if I was a Championship club and I was like, I've only got a limited budget for a centre back, I'd get Andrew in straight away, because I just think he's got it, and if it's the right environment for him, I think he can prove that. And then Josh is a tricky one, because I feel like he was making real progress. I feel like Norwich really think really highly of what he's got, and it just sort of stalled a bit. So I feel like he is also at a point now where I don't think he's going to get the chance here at the moment. I have to say, I think he needs to go away and kind of prove himself a bit, which surprises me a little bit, because of how highly he was thought of, say, 12 months ago. Norwich are pretty good at seeing someone, and if certainly if Daniel Farke feels like they've got it, then they will be given a chance. So I feel like he's probably at a position where he has got probably the most to prove and really needs the games to prove it. But they're all three are interesting stories. Adam and Andrew coming over from Ireland. It was probably about 5 years ago now. They had to prove a lot, and not everyone always saw it in them at Norwich. and Josh was released by Arsenal, or sort of had to get himself out of Arsenal. So, and Dan Barden, the goalkeeper, was another one who they've had to follow that up. So Norwich have kind of mixed and matched their actual recruitment in terms of the academy with someone like Todd, who was there from the age of 10. So it's sort of taken all sorts, but what they've done well is improve the finishing school element of it. I think Norwich have tended to always produce good young players. It's just whether there was a path for them to actually play in the first team at Norwich, and I think they've tried to make that much more accessible with, I have to say, the help of Daniel Farke, which, as you were saying earlier with Kieran Dow, if Daniel Farke plays you get the time and you get the trust to have a real go at it. It makes such a difference for these young players. There's not many managers I see who do that, who are also given the freedom to do it. Maybe a degree of less pressure on the wins. Daniel Farke isn't going to get sacked because he loses 10 games on the trot, because that didn't happen. And they did. So, that I think he can take a lot of credit, but so can those guys for taking the opportunity too and having that nurturing environment to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the finishing school aspect of Norwich is something which, it transmits to other fans of other fan bases, and to people who just watch Norwich casually. I think, there is a feeling that, obviously we touched on Max Aarons before, which was, Barcelona rumours and whatnot, and, no obligation to buy and whatever it was. There's clearly, that's not a coincidence that these young players are obviously thriving in this atmosphere because they're given the opportunity. Emi Buendia has been there for 2-3 years now, and now he's getting eventually an Argentina call up. It's because he's been given the opportunity. He could have been anywhere. But Norwich has proved to be the place which facilitated his growth, which facilitated his, he was given the freedom, the ability to do that. And I think that's one of the great success stories of Norwich, is that it has established itself as having a reputation as being a good place for developing talent, even if it isn't coming through the academy. So I think that's something which will always be attached to Norwich, especially while Daniel Farke is there. The other big club figure that I think we can't gloss over, I think from the scouted football angle, it is to do with scouting, is Stuart Webber, who's of course sort of the director of football. Seeing him operate close quarters as you will have done, his relationship with Daniel Farke, the joined up thinking, the alignment, his vision for the club, his vision for the future, but also his own future. There's a lot on the table there. With Stuart Webber, there's a lot to get into, so feel free to just completely wax lyrical, because I'm just going to be sat here gawping at how effective an operator he is. But there's a reason why he is in the role that he is, that he's come through the positions at, was it Wrexham, Liverpool, Huddersfield, beforehand to become sort of the transfers chief as it is at Norwich.
Yeah, he's it's really interesting with Stuart Webber, because again, you're right. I feel like I know what he's done quite well and things like that. And sometimes you're curious. It's like, well, I wonder what other people who haven't followed it deem that he's done. He did come through these different roles, and I remember the first thing anyone said to me about him just before he was being appointed at Norwich was, "Oh, he's a man in a hurry." Which struck me as an interesting thing to be said. I think the way he picked up his journey is fascinating. It's worth anyone listening to the High Performance podcast, because I know he did that with Jake Humphrey and Damien Hughes, isn't it? And sorry to plug another podcast, Joe. But
you can plug any athletic ones on here as you want. I've had Alex Stewart from Tifo on, and we like to say that get as many recommendations in as you can. I like to think that perhaps people might recommend the scouted one elsewhere, but hey, we can all dream.
Absolutely. Oh, what a man Alex is, by the way. So yeah, it's worth listening to that to get maybe a grounding on where Stuart has come from, because he's come from nowhere really to really develop this career, which I think ultimately, and you have to sort of remind yourself that when you look at what Huddersfield did, that was almost entirely on what Stuart led, because he was the defining factor as to how it changed in those few years. It was sort of bumbling along. He got hold of it. They got promoted. He left just before they went up. And admittedly, they did stay up, but I think some of that was a legacy of his recruitment plans and whatnot. And then, it unraveled effectively. And I think, and then what's happened at Norwich, it happened at the point where I was watching this team going, right, I'm now ready. Having yo-yoed, I'm now ready for 3 or 4 years of complete mediocrity here, because this is a massive change. And the 1 year I said that, they went and won the championship. It was ludicrous. I think Stuart, it is his vision. It is the way he pulls everything together and leads it. It's little details like the imagery around the changing the training ground, walking into a training ground and going, why have we got all these, porta cabins? Why is this club been in the Premier League for the last 7 years, yet they've done nothing to their training ground in 25 years? What, this place is rubbish. It is not a top of the class training ground as I look at it. Why has no one done anything to develop it? Which, they hadn't, because it had all gone on trying to develop the team. And that's so difficult for every team, every club that's promoted. It's a horrendous situation to deal with, especially when you're in Norwich's situation where no one's writing you a check to buy any players. So that vision probably helps being, a fresh pair of eyes and going in, but not just the vision, but then making it happen. Norwich came up with a way of crowdfunding, £5 million to redevelop the training ground when they were running out of parachute payments. It happened that they went up and they could pay the loan straight back. But, they did something at that point when it was the last thing they should have been doing, really. They should have done it way before that. He had to manage a financial situation that was far worse than he envisaged when he took the job on, to be honest. And I think he had some really difficult times. He was faced with the personal, what would you call it? The sort of personal niggle in the back of his mind, I suppose. He'd left Huddersfield, who'd just gone up, to this absolute mess of a state of things at Norwich. So there's a lot of personal development that's gone into that. But as I say, it's not just the vision; it's carrying it out, and it's probably motivating people to go and do it as well. I think possibly sometimes he gets credit for everything, and probably being the figure point of it and the driving force for it attracts that attention. He's the one who speaks about it, but he's actually very good at having the right people around him, and they will do things. A lot of the recruitment work comes from a recruitment team who are really bright, and they know what they're doing, and they get the faith from Stuart to then deliver on that. So I think that's what he does. I think you look at a football team on a pitch and you think, well, the best managers are the ones who have a team that is worth more than the sum of its parts. Because clearly, if you've just got a load of individuals, then that's up to the individuals, isn't it? And I think Stuart does that, managing a group of people. And I think anyone associated with Norwich should be hugely proud of where the club is, because it just looks so coherent. And even if they're blagging the plan, sometimes it looks like everything has happened completely by design. But that comes from the degree of planning and contingency. And Norwich have gone through COVID without any kind of benefactor putting any money in, and they've managed to ride it out. Whereas the only real issue has been the fact that it's meant that they probably have to sell a player this window to have more money to spend in the transfer window. It's not like they've been completely screwed by that £30 million hole. So I just think it's a club in his image and the people he's managed to work so well with. And this is probably where, if we take it right back to the start of the podcast, I see how well it's going, and I know how fragile these things are. He is desperate to make sure that he leaves the club and goes on to do whatever he wants to do next. And I don't even think he knows what that is. Although, I don't know, maybe he just won't say it, because he does strike me as a man with a plan. But, it is so fragile. It's going to be a really difficult act to follow him, as it will be with Daniel Farke whenever he leaves. They both have contracts. They are both open about their contracts, and they've both been open about the fact they end in June 2022. I think the hope is now that Daniel Farke will sign some sort of extension, I think. But whether that happens, how long that is beyond Stuart Webber being there, is a difficult one, because maybe it depends on what role Daniel has with the new sporting director. And I have no answers. I don't know if anyone has any answers, and that's a difficulty. And that may, in fairness, is probably will be the true sign of Stuart Webber's legacy. And I don't think that would be saying anything he doesn't know himself. I think there's a bit of him that hates that he helped get Huddersfield to where they were, and then having left, probably without a degree of succession planning, because he probably wasn't expecting to leave for Norwich, 6 to 8 months earlier. It just unravelled, and so it was particularly unstable, because that's what history tells us now. With Norwich, if Norwich still carry all of these values, all of this narrative and perception that they have now, if they carry that in 5 to 10 years' time, and he's been gone, for a good period of that, I think that would be the true legacy of what Stuart Webber has achieved. And that's maybe quite harsh, because he can't control what people after him do, but they are trying to create these cultures and values across the club that do withstand that. So we'll have to see. But it's very hard to underplay what he's done for the football club. And I think you listen to the owners, Delia and Michael, talk about where the club is now and all the things they've had to go through in the time they've been custodians of the club since 1996-97. I think that speaks volumes for everything that's happened and what Stuart Webber and his team have achieved.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's about, as you say there, just developing this framework, the framework that is Norwich City now in sort of the Webber era, if you want to say that, that carrying that on once he has left, because obviously, as you say, he's been open about his contract. He's openly stated that he would plan to move on in future. And from Norwich supporters that I've spoken to, they wouldn't begrudge him that. They're very open about the fact that he's obviously been massive for the club. But it's about, yes, I think there probably is an element, but with him, that he wants to leave the club in a fit state so that it can essentially be self-sufficient even without him. So that the Webber framework can be there, but it can be managed by somebody else, a different body, which I think. The Huddersfield example is a very good one, because the succession planning that you were referring to there, I think that it was clear that wasn't in place, and the recruitment essentially went to being a bit scattergun afterwards, and you get this influx of cash and maybe a little bit of not turmoil, but sort of turbulence, turnover at boardroom level, and then everything can be scrapped, and that framework that he'd built with Huddersfield in the Championship essentially grew cobwebs very quickly, and as a result the club suffered. So I think he's a very fascinating listen, and the High Performance podcast, as you said, it was one of the things I listened to before recording this podcast, before reading up about Stuart Webber, because he is just such an interesting guy. His philosophy, the way that he plans things out, he's meticulous. The whole prior planning prevents poor performance as a mantra, essentially, I think is something that would epitomize him quite well. And in terms of footballing directorship, he is essentially probably, I'd say, one of the most transparent, but also one of the most effective that I think we have in the current game, especially in England. So yeah, he's definitely somebody who, if he were to move on from Norwich in 2022, or if he were to get an extension and move on in future, I think any club that would take him on would be. I mean, obviously you'll know this, but I think from my perspective, any club who takes him on would be getting I mean, we talk about how players, £30 million players, can change a team. What about a sporting director who can, he can revolutionise two separate clubs and get them promoted to the riches of the Premier League? I mean, can you put a price on that? I can't.
I mean, likewise, both clubs, he's had the right freedom. I mean, I struggle to think of a club above Norwich's level where he would get the freedom he's got here.
Yeah.
So he has had the right environment, and like any player, with £30 million player, if they go into a team and they're not used properly, or they can't do what they want to do, it's pointless, isn't it? It's a complete waste of money. And I think that is why, as I said, I don't even know if Stuart will end up staying in football. He might do something completely different. He's that sort of a character that you just don't know. And I think, but I think that next football job for him will be fascinating if it comes, because he'll want a big job, but with big job usually comes big owners big money, and people don't like relinquishing what that brings them, which is generally control. So I think again, it's just probably being appreciative of the fact that he got to come into Norwich and literally said, he asked, well, what do you want? It's like, you do what you want, you go and do it, or how you want to view it, do it. And it's again why there's so much credit needs to go his way, because he's had the opportunity, but he has shaped this almost exactly as he would have liked to, and he's delivered on it, and he's been allowed to do it.
Yeah, certainly. I think we talk about players needing the freedom. I think essentially he has been allowed to build a club in his own image, and the framework, the evidence is there that he's able to do it. That's just all about what we got time for today as we approach the hour mark. But thank you again for tuning into the Scouted Football podcast. As I say, if you've enjoyed this episode or any previous installment, do consider recommending us to a friend or family member. If you're watching on YouTube, stick a like on this video, as every little bit helps us continue creating content like this. Michael, though, thank you very much for joining me, for your Norwich City insight, for just a very good football chat. Where can people find your work, essentially, and where can people follow you on Twitter?
Thank you, Joe. It's been great fun. I'm on Twitter. The handle is at Michael J. Bailey. J is in the initial. I write for The Athletic. So I would highly recommend anyone who likes football to subscribe to The Athletic, because I have some incredibly talented colleagues. So that will be theathletic.co.uk for those in the UK, and .com for those elsewhere, I would imagine. All my writing is on there. And I think that will probably be enough. You'll be able to find me elsewhere if you look hard enough, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Lots to look forward to in the coming weeks. The UEFA Under-21 European Championships resume at the end of May and into early June, before the big one, Euro 2020, kicks off, and that should be an excellent festival of football. That's all we have time for. I've been Joe Donoghue. This has been the Scouted Football Podcast. Stay safe, take care, bye for now.